Welcome to Building Toronto. I'm Peter Sobchak. Not long ago, the area known as West Don Lands was a black hole on the city's map. But now it is emerging as an example of how to creatively revitalize derelict urban spaces. It is defined by two different yet ingenious solutions, the Don River Park and Underpass Park, and surrounded by new residential projects being built by Urban Capital and Toronto Community Housing.
Waterfront Toronto's vision for the waterfront includes the construction of the parks in the public realm first, as a first step in the transformation of a new precinct. By doing so, we create access to the water's edge where there was no access before. So the construction of the parks within the West Don Lands allows for a destination we created, and already the transformation will begin in that precinct.
The West Don Lands has been derelict for a long time. It was a post-industrial site, and Waterfront Toronto got involved in 2001 when we were appointed by all three levels of government. West Don Lands is about 80 acres of the derelict land, and it will house 6,000 residential units, of which 1,200 will be affordable rental housing. We'll also have at least 2 daycares, at least 1 or maybe 2 elementary schools, commercial, retail, employment lands, as well as about 23 acres of parks and public spaces.
The parks and the public realm works like a structuring framework for the precinct. So we demolish the sites, then we build the new roads, the new streetscapes, the new parks, and that acts as a way of organizing the site for future development. The public realm in the West Don Lands includes Don River Park, Underpass Park, Front Street, Cherry Street, and some of the local streets. Cherry Street will have a new transit line, a linear plaza space. Front Street will include more of a plaza space for overflow for cafes and restaurants. The north-south streets will be tree-lined, neighborhood streets. Underpass Park and River Square and Don River Park will allow for programming in all seasons. Front Street will be one of the main arteries of the West Don Lands, and it extends from downtown and will terminate against Bayview and Don River Park. Don River Park has been coordinated with a flood protection landform, and we call it the FPL. The FPL is built to protect the downtown core from flooding in the future. And basically it's comprised of a clay core that prevents water from flooding the downtown. So the park designers responded with the integration of the park design above, and we have several different high points in the park with different views back to the city. We have a marsh within the park that also utilizes the grade and topography to collect stormwater and treat it on site as well. So the park is very much integrated with the FPL below.
One of the things that's interesting about Don River Park, and I think it's more common today than it would have been 100 years ago, is that we build parks on marginal pieces of land, or in this case, on this flood protection landform that was actually, the engineering was done by civil engineers, and it has a very different kind of work to do, which is to prevent the water from the Don River to come into this new neighborhood that's being created. What's exciting is that we combine the kind of engineering imperative to build up topography, and then we just kept going. So the engineers kind of passed the engineering to us as landscape architects, and we took the topography and built these 2 hills that are the centerpieces of the park. Couple benefits of that. I think all of us in the city like to get up high. We like to get on hills. It's just a great place for views, and the wind and the light is great up there. And I think the design was also trying to react to the relative horizontality of that part of Toronto. It's kind of flat, the streets are kind of all level, and so when we've piled up the landscape to create this undulation and topography, we're trying to create experiential range for people.
Don River Park is a neighborhood park for the West Don Lands, and it is more of an anchoring park in the southeast corner of the precinct. There are several different amenities within the park for the local community, also across the river, including the splash pad, play areas, washing facilities, barbecue, flexible playing field. These all can be used by the community, but there's also an opportunity to program the park for the greater city of Toronto with the open lawn area, and also with tobogganing hills and the exterior fireplace for programming in the winter months as well.
I think the most important thing to say about the role of Don River Park and the Don lands generally is that we've structured it as a landscape that can be many different things to many people. There's an active area with playgrounds and a pavilion for families to use on one hill. There's a broad landscape through the middle that actually is sort of the terminus of Front Street that is more passive, lawns and places for picnicking and playing pickup sports. And then on the other side and closer to River Square, we've created a more natural feeling in the sense that there's a created wetlands there, and there's a lot of topography, and we've introduced stone so that depending on what you're looking for, there's a broad range of experiences that are possible. But spring and fall are treasured here, and so Mary Ann Thompson, the designer of the pavilion, incorporated into the pavilion a fireplace, a fire pit that is, will be locked up when the park is not open, but which people can have fires in the spring and fall, and they're actually retractable walls that create wind protection so that, April or late October, if it's chilly, you could still be out there and have a fire and marshmallows and that sort of thing too. One of the things that was really very powerful for us in the design of the park was we did a whole series of public engagements where we got together with people and heard their aspirations about the park. And then we also had a really strong local design team, and specifically working with the urban designer Ken Greenberg, who is a great lover of public spaces in Toronto, and nuanced for me the way people in Toronto use parks and love them.
The layout for the Pan Am Athletes Village was based on the West Don Lands precinct plan by Waterfront Toronto. In that plan, Don River Park served as the southeast corner kind of anchor to the precinct. So there's a relationship set up with Front Street, with Mill Street, with also Bayview and River Street and River Square. So Front Street, which will become the main kind of artery for the Pan Am Athletes Village, will terminate against Don River Park.
Well, it's incredibly exciting that Don River Park is going to be the front yard for the Athletes Village. And it's also going to be really good to look at from the perimeter buildings. It's going to be this nice view from all the apartments and rooms that will see it.
The current construction of the Pan Am Athletes Village actually fits exactly into our precinct plan vision. There were no major changes needed, and it's being implemented as anticipated. The thing that the Pan Am Games has brought to the West Don Lands is it's accelerated development in this area by probably 5 to 10 years. Otherwise, we were looking at taking smaller parcels out to the private sector, chunk by chunk, and in this way we get a significant amount and the core of the West Don Lands built in a much shorter time frame. So we need to look at every space we can possibly use in a more creative way and do the most we can with what we have within the city itself.
What's interesting about the West Don lands is it has been, in a sense, bisected by the overpasses that cut through it. So there's some development on the north side and there's some development on the south side. And we looked at Underpass Park and said, well, we can probably make it safe and secure, but also take advantage of the fact that it's there, it's vacant land, and we could put some recreation below it.
The reason we looked at spaces creatively like Underpass Park is because there's so much pressure to focus on intensification and building downtown where infrastructure exists. We can't just keep continuing to expand into the suburbs and beyond, so we need to look at every space we can possibly use in a more creative way and do the most we can with what we have within the city itself. So we've sort of pushed ourselves and we got community input in order to look at the spaces, especially the derelict spaces like where Underpass Park now is, and use that space more creatively to fit into the community.
Despite the fact Underpass Park is located underneath an overpass, the car does not really play a major role in the experience of the park. The structure is really unique. It offers sun protection from the rain as well. There are two streets that will bisect through the park at grade with the park, but that just works like any other park in the city adjacent to a road. So basically cars do not really define the park. It's more the structure above.
Well, the really interesting thing about Underpass Park is the structure that we actually had in place prior to us starting. So it was really taking advantage of a beautiful series of columns and beams that form the support for the overpasses above the park. They also carve up the space into different rooms. So there's, in a sense, a room for one type of recreational activity, and then another room, and then another room.
There are three distinct areas of Underpass Park. There's an active zone, which is defined by skateboard, basketball, and generally more kind of a teenage kind of hangout area. The central block would be more of a children's playground with seating and also opportunity for events and programming. And the third parcel, the most westerly parcel, is mostly planting, seating, and a future community garden.
Lighting was particularly important for us. We needed it to deliver safety and security, but we wanted it to be fun as well. So if you go down to Underpass Park at night, you're going to see this cacophony of color. It's really quite interesting how the color, which we have orchestrated through lights that shoot up onto the beams and the columns, have transformed the space. Along with the lighting, there's this beautiful piece of art that was done by Paul Raff that is, in a sense, this stainless steel cloud that floats over one portion of the park.
Mirage is a public artwork. It's a sculpture made up of 59 reflective panels in a horizontal array. It's attached and suspended from the overpass. And it has the optical effects. It's called mirage, like a mirage in nature. You might think of one in the desert or in the Canadian North, where particles in the atmosphere modify the optics of what you see and make it seem like you're seeing a reflection. And so mirage is a sort of illusion. You see the light beyond and the people beyond and the world upside down in a kind of watery atmosphere above. It's inspired by the place itself. It's kind of an unusual place. It's a remarkable place. It's you know, the overpass arguably kind of disconnects the neighborhoods on either side, and so it visually, by reflecting and bouncing view and light, reconnects them. It takes these kind of monumental concrete columns, these giant sort of modern Stonehenge-like things, and sort of doubles their height and doubles the sense of the space above. So, you know, it's really about the experience of walking around and seeing the view change and seeing things upside down and having a kind of an enriched and different experience of the physical environment of this part of the city. I've been told that the effect of the work is pretty subtle at first. People walk into the park and they sort of wander under mirage and sort of start to look up and realize there's something there, and it's kind of, it's illuminated and it seems to be alive with movement. And as they move, the world's moving around them, and then they might see a car drive by upside down in the distance, and it has a kind of almost kind of gently surreal quality. And I think you know, this is all part of the kind of rich vitality that this park and the sculpture in this part of the city is offering.
The opportunity for open space, true legitimate open space, is rare in cities now. It's becoming harder and harder to find it. The every city in Canada, as a product of the 40s and 50s and 60s, has spaces just like this one. And if we can use it, not necessarily always as a park, but if you can begin to imagine that these spaces don't have to be leftovers, don't have to be places where people try to move around them and away from them as fast as possible, I think that there's all sorts of opportunities that you would be able to find.
The key to making this park a success is simply making it a place that people want to go, that people want to hang out. And so that's partly in the aesthetics of the environment, that's partly in its proximity and ease of access. It's partly the way it's knit into the neighborhood, so it's a kind of easy place to flow through and walk through. And then, you know, I think it's also, everyone needs to engage in the metropolitan character of this place, because this is no longer sprawling urbanism. This is sort of V2 of the city's development. It's a metropolitan condition where activities and infrastructure and things overlap and come together and make it a more charged and interesting environment. And I can see from the skateboarders over there that it's already a place where they want to come and hang out.
But if you think of city building and the way cities evolve over time, they grow and evolve organically. And what's happening here is that you've got a large area of the city that's been underutilized for a long time.
In the West Don Lands, we did comprehensive subdivision application to the City of Toronto, where we worked through establishing the streets and blocks plan, and on top of that then we were able to process a zoning application for all of the lands that established heights and setbacks and building envelopes and that sort of thing. And then the lands are ready for the developers, because we've taken away the environmental risk, the zoning and planning risk. They understand what's expected of them as developers in terms of sustainability and design excellence, and can bid on the process and attain some of these sites.
TCHC was first invited by the City of Toronto to become involved in the West Don Lands project. The site that we are working on originally came from Infrastructure Ontario and was a brownfield industrial site in the past. We got involved in 2006 and in the very early days began our design. We were actually the first site in West Don Lands to start the redevelopment process, and it's been an exciting process ever since.
With respect to the remediation, Waterfront Toronto partnered with the Province of Ontario to do a comprehensive risk assessment, risk management plan for the West Don Lands. So we looked at all the contamination that was here from the various industrial uses in the past. We looked at what were things that had to actually come out of the site and couldn't stay here. We worked with the Ministry of the Environment, and we got approved by them what's called a risk management plan for the area, and a number of permissions that were allowed, including residential and park uses.
Our project in the West Don Lands is a pretty complicated one actually, and quite exciting at the same time. It's 1.7 acres, it's 3 buildings that have underground parking, and it consists of a mix of affordable seniors housing and family housing, which is actually quite interesting from the point of view of end users and the mix of demographics and people that would be enjoying the outdoor spaces on site. It's also a complicated project in the sense that it's a combination of construction through concrete buildings and also wood frame for the family housing to the south. The site is split into 3 buildings, with 1 building fronting onto King Street. At River, that is a seniors building that consists of 128 one-bedroom units. And behind that, perpendicular to that building, are 2 buildings of family housing consisting of 115 units in the 2 buildings, which is wood frame built on top of a concrete base. Our project is being designed and built to lead gold standards. We are using recycled regional materials during construction. We are recycling construction materials while we're building the buildings. And we're using as well low-emitting finishes and green-sensitive products such as cleaning product, etc., when the building opens for business. We are also lowering stormwater runoff from the site to reduce the impact on municipal infrastructure while we build. And it's in a neighborhood that didn't used to be a residential neighborhood. It was an industrial neighborhood. But if you think of city building and the way cities evolve over time, they grow and evolve organically. And what's happening here is that you've got a large area of the city that's been underutilized for a long time. And there's a unique opportunity for not only our site in the West Don Lands, but for the rest of the West Don Lands to form a new and unique part of the City of Toronto.
The River City development is comprised of 4 phases. Phase 1 is cladded in black metal panels with a punched window aesthetic, and it has faceted angular walls, which was driven by the tension of the site, actually. Phase 2 is much more like a jewel. It's a white building, still metal panels, but it's much more pristine in nature, kind of protected by the black buildings around it. Phase 3 is still in production, which would be located on River Square on the south side of the Adelaide-Richmond overpass. The River City development is seeking LEED Gold status through a number of objectives. To name a few, we are using locally sourced construction materials. We are utilizing on-site stormwater management and retention and reuse. We are using high-performance windows and doors. We have a high percentage of green roofs on the project, both on top of the buildings and in a common element courtyard. What inspired Urban Capital to get involved in the site in the West Don Lands was the latent potential in the area and the opportunity to be involved in such a large transformation of the city. River City will be integrated with the public realm through its surface treatment of the sidewalks and the surface treatment of the Woonerf, which wraps through our project. The Woonerf is a shared surface between pedestrian and vehicular. We're using pavers that will be used on the pedestrian surface as well as the vehicular surface, so there's really no separation between where vehicle, where pedestrian can there's no hierarchy really. We're also working together with Waterfront Toronto to tie in the park into our system, so for pedestrians or the public entering into the park, they could walk through our development and gain access to the park on the east side of the River City sites that will eventually take you down to River Park.
You know, I live in New York, and before that I lived in Boston, but I really marvel at Toronto, and I think that there's a world-class commitment to building a livable city that I see in Toronto that's almost unequaled anywhere else. And there are so many initiatives going on right now, especially in the waterfront and related to Waterfront Toronto, where a celebration of the edge of the lake, but also a celebration of living in the city is such a focus. I think historically it'll mark the time we're all living in now, that people have put so much emphasis on cities and the quality of life in cities.
Toronto has the challenge of having to deal with outdoor environments made orphans by our car culture. But Underpass Park shows that transforming derelict spaces beneath overpasses requires only creativity and imagination to transform something meaningless into something meaningful. The West Don Lands will be one of Toronto's next great neighborhoods. It is family-friendly, people-focused, environmentally sustainable, and designed for living. I'm Peter Sobchak. Join me next time on Building Toronto.